Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alastair.
And this fortnight we are talking about Zack Snyder's Justice League, or the Snyder Cut if you're nasty online. The extended 4-hour, hopefully final version of his superhero movie from a few years ago. And then we'll also be talking about Pacific Rim The Black, the anime spin-off of Guillermo del Toro's popular mech vs kaiju film. But before those two epic franchise extensions, Alastair, what else have you consumed in the last fortnight?
So I've been watching a Japanese sci-fi show that's available on Netflix in the UK. I think actually Netflix everywhere because it's a Netflix production. That's called Alice in Borderland. Yeah, it's a good show. I'd recommend it. It's a sort of tight 8 episodes. The plot is that 3 friends, sort of slightly adrift, doing what they like, teenagers in modern Tokyo, suddenly find themselves in a sort of alternative reality Tokyo, which is pretty much empty of people, or there's very few people considering how densely populated Tokyo is. They're in this sort of bizarre alternative world, and they discover that they're each issued with like a visa for this world that's for a certain number of days, and if that visa expires, then a sort of laser from the sky comes down and kills you. which sounds silly, but when it's first revealed, it's actually like quite scary. And the way you extend your visa is you have to complete games, and there's different types of games. Some involve strength, some involve like sort of logic, some involve betraying people. They all have nasty twists to them, which usually involves people getting killed or different ways people can be killed. The plot follows these characters as they try to work out what's going on in this bizarre world, how they ended up there, how do they get home, whilst at the same time they have to complete these games to continue their visas and suffer the consequences.
Okay. I've seen this advertised on the Netflix screensaver, and I did, obviously from the title and the fact that there seems to be some kind of playing card motif at play, assumed it was going to be, some sort of riff on Alice in Wonderland. Do they have, like, Queens of Hearts?
Yeah, so I think the connection is through the cards, which is that each game has a card insignia to it, and the suit of the card determines the type of game. So like a spade, I think it's a physical strength game. A diamond is like a logic puzzle. A heart is one that involves betrayal. And then the number is sort of the difficulty. So the higher the numbers, the more difficult they are. So the finale of the first series takes place with them trying to complete a 10 of hearts game, which obviously is very difficult and challenging. So that's the kind of connection. There's not really much more of a connection to Alice in Wonderland beyond that. I guess they're in a sort of alternative, twisted, slightly darker version of reality. But yeah, it's not immediately apparent what the title has to do with the plot. There's not a character called Alice. But that said, it is very, very tense. I think sort of the appeal of this and why I really recommend it is that the challenges are really tense, edge of your seat stuff. And yeah, each episode usually involves, they're having to do one of these games, and each time they come up with something that's really tense and exciting. Especially, I think, the first episode really just sets up what you get and has a really good game in it. If you watch the first episode and find it tense, then do continue. The third episode is absolutely devastating. I won't say more because it's better to go in without knowing what happens. But yeah, it goes in an unexpected direction.
So we're in sort of high concept dystopia territory then, I guess. I don't know if it counts as YA or not, but it sounds a bit Hunger Games, at least in premise.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of high concept dystopia. Someone, is kind of making people play horrible blood sports for their amusement and manipulating people. Yeah, it's got a sort of post-apocalyptic vibe going on in that there's a sort of society of the players who banded together. At one point they encounter a group where a large number of players have kind of grouped together into a sort of hierarchical society in order to try and beat the game creators, which has got this kind of vibe where, like kind of the structures that would like emerge from a post-apocalyptic society, a world without authority or anything, even though the physical world is still there. Everyone's just disappeared. Okay,
and as high concept dystopias go, you'd recommend this over Tribes of Europa?
Yeah, if you're going to watch one non-English language sci-fi show on Netflix, then I think Alice in Borderlands is definitely more entertaining and more unsettling and probably better paced. Things like that. I would strongly recommend this if you like your sort of violent dystopias. You're kind of like Hunger Games, but that's more violent and involves more betrayal.
Okay, shit. Guess we should have covered this a few weeks ago.
But it's good. We can always cover if they do a second series, I suppose. Which I hope they do, because it's good.
Okay, cool. Look forward to that in the possible future, listeners.
Anyway, that's what I've been up to for the last couple of weeks. Nick, what have you been up to?
Okay, well, I suspect many listeners, have been watching a little show called The Falcon and the Winter Soldier on the Disney Plus network, in which, well, it's a spin-off show about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. If you liked the movie Captain America: The Winter Soldier, then this sure is the TV show for you. We are, of course, inevitably going to come back to this in greater detail once it's finished, but, just to touch on it while it's new and fresh and hot, to have some half-formed opinions that will probably be proved wrong before the end of the season. Yes, I've seen the first 2 episodes, and until I watched the second episode quite recently, I was concerned this was going to be a bit of a pissy downer review, because honestly, I thought the first episode was kind of a bit slow and it reminded me a lot of the old Netflix Marvel Defenders show things, to be honest. It felt very trudging in very long, repetitive scenes to make the same point, and nothing actually happens till the last minute of the episode to get you to come back. But happily, the second one, which I saw just before we recorded, had a bit more meat to it and a bit more actual plot and a bit more sense of momentum and things happening, and less people just trudging to get to the obvious point. So yeah, despite the fact that I still think the first episode could have been a lot faster paced, or they could have just had the first episode be 10 minutes at the front of the second episode, I'm a bit more on board now. I think there's a few interesting concepts which, depending on what way they go with them, whether they actually work with some of the interesting moral ambiguity they've introduced, could be quite good. Like, I'm interested by the fact they've introduced, I guess, semi-spoilers if you haven't seen the first episode of Falcon and Winter Soldier, the new Captain America character they've introduced, John Walker, who, is a character from the comics and had one of these standard replacement hero arcs where Cap has quit or been fired or something, and a new guy comes on and turns out to be unsuitable. There's at least an attempt at nuance so far. He's clearly a bit less of an all-round lovable top best man ever than Steve Rogers was, but he's not so far a complete dick. There is some effort to give him empathy, so I'm hoping that level of nuance will continue throughout the series.
Yeah, I've also been watching this show, as a significant number of the people I follow on Twitter are, if not the whole planet. And yeah, I think what they're doing with the new Captain America is quite interesting. Yeah, I like how they worked hard to make him sort of seem sympathetic and likeable, because inevitably the audience is going to distrust a new Captain America and think, what's going on with this guy? Is this something we should be suspicious of? Is he going to turn out to be a villain? Obviously, I'm speaking on behalf of someone who's not familiar with the character from the comics. I'm not sure what the arc will be, but inevitably there will be a sense of mistrusting someone who tries to be the new Captain America, especially when they're set up maybe in opposition to, rather than in conflict with, the heroes of the story, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So there is some interesting ambiguity going on there. I'm also interested to see where they go with these super-powered villains they've got called the Flag Smashers, who are an anarchist group who want a world without borders. I must say, one thing this second episode convinced me of is that Anthony Mackie, playing the Falcon, is a great actor, because he can say Flag Smashers and make it sound convincing and with a straight face. So I'm interested to see where they go with these villains who basically might turn out to be the equivalent of a villain from a McBain movie, or a sort of Ben Shapiro's wet dream of what internet liberals are like. I assume they're going to go with something more subtle than the anarchists who don't like borders are bad. There's 4 episodes left, so they're probably going to develop that in some way.
Again, I assume this isn't a huge spoiler, because his involvement in the show has been public knowledge for at least a year or two. I sort of assumed they were going to end up being, somehow being manipulated by your man Zemo. I don't know, based on what we've seen so far, is Zemo going to be the villain of the story, or is he going to be playing a sort of taunting them from prison Hannibal Lecter role? We'll have to wait and see, I suppose. I was expecting him to pop up at any minute to be revealed as the man behind the Flag Smashers, but so far it doesn't seem to be going that obvious.
Yeah, we'll see where it's going. I think where it might be going is these naive young people who wanted a world without borders and wanted a better world have left themselves in their naivety and not understanding the world to be influenced by a supervillain like Zemo. But like I say, this is trying to review things that haven't come out yet, so we'll have to wait and see where they're going. I have some faith that they will do something interesting with this plot line. I also have a greater than 0% belief that it will turn out to be basically right-wing propaganda.
Yeah, I don't know. I know there's been a bit of the old is Marvel military propaganda chat lately. Not undeservedly. They do love their somewhat pornographic shots of planes, so I can't say they haven't left themselves open to it. And this is obviously very much the military version of the Marvel machine. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not finding this quite as enthralling as WandaVision, although, the second episode has at least given me some hope, but it will be, not entirely boring, and hopefully the first episode was just some slightly misjudged overlong setup.
Yeah, the second episode was certainly more entertaining than the first. This has got much more what you'd expect from also sort of this kind of traditional Marvel sauce that they put on everything, in that it's got witty, slightly self-aware banter between the main characters. It's got a sort of an epic fight scene in every episode, one that's pretty much, like up to the same standard as what you'd see in the cinema. There was like a flying fight scene in the first episode that was quite spectacular. There was a fight scene on top of some speeding trucks in the second episode. So this is bringing epic action with a side helping of witty quips that you'd expect from Marvel.
Yeah, I must admit, there were times in the show where I did think, I'm finding the sort of Falcon and Winter Soldier bickering like children thing funny enough, but part of me feels it's being played up a little bit in a way that's not entirely in character. But if that's what gets them through the episode, fine.
Yeah, it is a bit sort of, I thought they were friends in the films, and now they seem to be, at each other's throats.
I'm not really sure. I mean, I guess they had a sort of a vibe where they were sort of guys who hung out together because they had a friend in common, and obviously that friend's now disappeared. So I guess it makes sense that they would not be, best friends, but the way they've immediately descended into squabbling and spatting is quite strange. Also, I enjoyed the way they spent the whole of the first episode, like, very tangibly keeping them apart, which I thought was a bit... I mean, I guess they've got to start apart, but I assumed in a show called The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they'd be together by the end of the first episode. And having made this conscious, creative decision to keep them apart for the first episode, at the start of the second episode, they basically just casually meet up in an aircraft hangar and immediately form a partnership with very little ceremony. That was a strange moment of pacing for me.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I was surprised at how undramatic it was when they decided to team up. It's an interesting creative decision, but fair enough.
I was basically happy and willing to give them it because I've been spending most of the first episode, or at least most of the back half of the first episode, thinking that we're really not going to get to any of the fun Falcon Winter Soldier team up stuff in this episode at all, like not even in a meeting. So the fact that it didn't make me sit through 2 episodes of torturous build-ups to that is, I'm willing not to look a gift horse in the mouth on this occasion. But anyway, as a result of this quite slow pacing, yeah, we've had a third of the series, but I feel like we're still very much just finishing the early setup for this. We'll have to see how it develops, and we'll be back in about 2 podcast time to tell you.
Next, this episode, we'll be reviewing Zack Snyder's Justice League. For those who haven't been following the discourse around this film, this is a new director's cut of the 2017 film Justice League. The original film had been substantially edited and partly reshot by Joss Whedon after director Zack Snyder was unable to finish the project due to a personal tragedy. Following an internet campaign, we now have the cut that is Snyder's vision of the film. It's nearly 4 hours long, and follows Batman as he attempts to unite the heroes of Earth against the evil Steppenwolf who's coming to enslave the planet. However, can they save the Earth without Superman? So we have seen this film in its entirety. So, Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, obviously I've been somewhat dismissive of previous Snyder films. I went into this with a slight sense of dread and surprised myself by having an okay time. As someone who has read a lot of superhero comics and watched a sizable majority of the recent movies, I quite enjoyed the slight differentiation here of seeing the premise taken really dead seriously. Like, as a sort of result of the Marvel films and the general sheen of Whedon-esque irony that hangs over a lot of recent pop culture, a lot of previous superhero films go into it with a certain sense of awareness and willingness to take the piss out of themselves. No one's taking the piss out of the heroes in this film. Everyone's very straight-faced about it. In a weird way, it felt quite retro. Like, it might have been helped by the fact that this film is, for reasons which I find baffling, but I'm sure make sense to someone, has been released in a square aspect ratio that makes it look like a TV show from pre-widescreen. It's got this sort of dead serious, completely irony-free tone. It's got this square aspect ratio. The special effects, although perfectly watchable, are a bit pre-cinema, and it just makes it feel like I'm watching a sort of epic fantasy series from the 80s or something. This sort of completely unapologetic silliness. And yeah, as somebody who's read a lot of superhero comics, I can sort of accept that. There's a part of me that occasionally gets a bit tired of the mandatory quip in every single superhero film about how stupid the costumes and all the names are. Why not? Take them seriously. Do your sprawling, weird take on how it's actually epic myth. I mean, the thing that annoyed me about Batman v Superman wasn't that it took it seriously. I can, as I'm saying now, live with that. It was more the fact that it got into a level of ponderous, pretentious bleakness. It took itself, it wasn't just serious, it was like aggressively, annoyingly self-serious. And this film, I think, just about skates on the right side of that. It's still, of course, far longer than any film needs to be. I mean, it's basically a mini-series at this point. It is even helpfully divided into chapters for ease of, like, series-style consuming, which I did fully take advantage of. I know I think Alastair did watch the whole thing in one go. Good luck to you, mate, but I didn't do that. But yeah, I mean, I will criticise it later, but for the record, I quite enjoyed this as an experience. Some of the stuff in the epilogue soured me a little bit. There's a bit, which I guess we'll spoil later maybe, which teases future storylines that seemed a bit too Batman v Superman for my liking. And some of the long, rambling backstory montages, I know the whole point of this is it's uncut, but they really could have been cut. But yeah, as a superhero fan, I didn't hate seeing this different take on them, even if I'm not sure it really has much to contribute to the wider culture beyond here is a different take on superheroes.
I agree with you that it is refreshingly different. Yeah, in that this is not a a quippy superhero film, and that was at least different. And there's something to be said for it. I had low expectations going in based on like Batman v Superman. I think it's like the worst thing we've covered since we started the podcast. So, and it did manage to exceed my low expectations in that there is some value of entertainment in this 4-hour film that I watched in one sitting, partly because on some level it's been created, I thought, as like a single thing to be, there's a vision that's been executed as a single item, although also divided up. So I kind of wanted to see how it felt as this kind of single consistent sort of tone and arc. And yeah, although I preferred it to both Batman versus Superman and also to the 2017 cut of this film, this is a better piece of art overall. This new cut it is an improvement. It's not an experience that I can really recommend to anyone in good faith. If you're saying I'm thinking about watching this, I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, if you're interested in the tone and seeing the vision executed, it's not as bad as, I don't know, again, watching Batman versus Superman or something like that. But it is a flawed film, which is why I can't recommend watching it. It is, for obvious reasons, it's too long, it's too slow-paced. There isn't really enough complex characterization or plot to justify a nearly 4-hour length. The mood is not interesting enough to justify a 4-hour length. There's a lot of overindulged slow motion, which that seems to be a Zack Snyder signature, his love of slow-mo. But there are so many scenes when I thought like this would just be more effective, like without sort of tedious slow-mo, with like a sort of long, slow song put over the top of it, especially when you get to kind of like the third or so scene like that. So yeah, I can't recommend it.
Yeah, I know. I did enjoy some of the really weird, incongruous, slow, ponderous ballads on the score over yet more slow-mo superhero shots. Was there a shot of Aquaman being swallowed by the waves with some sort of sprawling Nick Cave ballad playing over it? It was very strange.
Yeah.
I can appreciate the audacity of doing that, I suppose, but it is a bit bizarre, and it's weird. On a plot level, this film basically has the rough content of the superhero cartoons I used to watch as a kid. There's not really, as I said at the end of my last bit, there's not a lot to it. The superheroes want to fight the baddies want to get the magic things. I mean, don't get me wrong, everyone's motivation is better than in the previous version. Like, almost every character has more going on than they did in the Joss Whedon cut, which I think had been very much slashed down dramatically to get it below 2 hours, for the love of God. Like, I can see why the actor playing Cyborg, Ray Fisher, was a big proponent of releasing this cut, as his character did get completely mullered in the cinematic version. And the Steppenwolf villain, although he's still not going to win any prizes for character depth, at least in this film he sort of has one, whereas I don't remember getting any impression of him beyond he sure is a big dude in the previous version I watched. Yeah,
absolutely. The plot and character make a lot more sense in this version, which is why it's an improvement on the previous one. Like, Steppenwolf was, in the cinema cut, very much a evil for evil's sake villain. He just sort of, appears and just wants to enslave the world for seemingly no reason. And he's given a modicum of character in this, in that he's serving Darkseid, a sort of a greater villain. He's betrayed him in the past and is seeking redemption by conquering Earth and retrieving the mother boxes, which is the plot line, which, again, the mother boxes makes more sense. It all makes more sense, and the characters are given more depth and things like that, which is, I guess, brings me to the overall conclusion that fundamentally this film that they're trying to make is probably fatally flawed in and of itself, in that a 4-hour cut is the only way it can vaguely have said to have worked, and which is, like I say, too much. So I guess if you wanted to make a functioning Justice League, I think you need to scrub this setup and go back to the drawing board. But I certainly think that Cyborg was given a much better deal with this, in that the tragedy of his character made more sense. One thing I was a bit disappointed is that Amy Adams is probably the best actor in the whole thing, and she's still not really given very much to do apart from look sad in a couple of scenes. I kind of wished they'd given her more of a role, considering they were making this film much bigger and longer. But it is better treatment of the characters.
I mean, I know it's 4 hours long, but there's still a lot of characters vying for space in it. In the Amy Adams storyline, there's also the slightly odd appearance of the Martian Manhunter, which, even as someone who has read the comics, I'm still not sure I fully understand. I'm going to assume he isn't a villain, because in the comics he's not a villain, but I don't really know what he's doing. I mean, that and the Darkseid stuff as well. There's a lot of stuff which, whether this is because it's something he's trying to do now, or whether it's something what was left from the original cut, and it was always the plan, all seems like, set up or campaigning for the possible future sequel, which I don't know if I see much chance of us getting.
I think it's unlikely to happen, because it's one thing for fans to campaign for the studio to spend money to re-edit a film that already exists. It's another thing for the studio to spend a lot more money to make a film from scratch.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, they wanted the original vision of the Justice League restored, and one of the reasons it was cut down, and one of the reasons why the released version didn't make any sense, was because this was, I'm pretty sure, definitely intended to be the first film of a series of at least two. Like, it was meant to be an Infinity War style first half. Now, for the record, Infinity War is a better film, but at the end of the day, they wanted the release of the original vision of Zack Snyder Justice League, and I guess this is what it was always going to be, Darkseid looming around, waiting to appear in the second film. I'm not quite sure how the Darkseid hinting ties in with the hinting about the dark future in which Batman and the Joker are hanging around in a desert, but, God willing, we'll never know.
They had one of Darkseid's ships in the background for that bit, didn't they? Sort of floating over some kind of city that was, I think, supposed to recognise, probably Gotham.
Yeah, considering how these films often get cited as like the ultimate rebuke of childish Marvel films, they're for adults rather than kids, not just for kids anymore, something. Yeah, it is, there's no... I don't know. It doesn't really strike me as for adults in any more meaningful way. It's just another superhero film. Yes, it's got a notably different tone, but I don't feel like they've reinvented anything. They just made, a different tone of the same film. It's a bunch of superheroes teaming up. Especially once you got into the second half, when it did become, a series of superhero fights. The first three chapters, if you're watching this film using the chapter system, which I did. So I did get quite a sense of, like, the first three chapters had this sort of weird, slow burn fantasy epic thing, like Game of Thrones with less characterization and more costumes. And in the last few parts, it did kind of devolve into a series of superhero fights, which was not as interesting, to be honest. At that point, it did get a bit into just another superhero film territory.
Yeah, I think the fatal flaw at the heart of all this is that because this film has to kind of set up and introduce these characters, apart from, I guess, like Batman and Superman, who are well known and have had recent films, rather than, as Marvel doing, bringing together sort of characters who've already had sometimes several films about them. So, in Infinity War, there's almost no characterization of Doctor Strange, or the Winter Soldier. They're just very much almost there, but they've had films looking at them. You kind of know what the deal is. This film is doing a lot more heavy lifting, and say it's got to introduce you to what's the story with the Flash, what's the story with Cyborg, what's the story with, Wonder Woman to a lesser degree. It's got to bring all these pieces together, which is why I guess it needs that length to properly give them characters and properly give them a sense of what's going on. And also its plot hasn't been seeded throughout lots of films, like the way they set up the Infinity Stones, so it's doing a lot, much like a TV show, kind of introduce all its characters and then kind of spend a little time with each one, giving them like a bit of plot and background and things like that, and weave threads together. So the TV show sort of setup for this does seem to be more of a sort of, a functioning take on the story that they're trying to tell. Like, I can see why they divide it into chapters and make it as accessible as possible for TV watching, because that seems to be what it's closest to, rather than something that's designed for sort of cinema consumption. Like, I think if I watched this in the cinema, I'd have got a very numb bum.
I think surely at some point they'd have to do an interval just for medical reasons. I mean, people made jokes about needing to pee during Endgame, and then inevitably there was the backlash against the jokes. In the old days there were 3-hour films every 10 minutes. But 4 hours, surely at some point you have to have basic pity on people.
Yeah, I'm not sure at what point the intermission stopped being a thing in cinema, but it was certainly still popular in the 60s. These huge films like Ten Commandments or Cleopatra, or even more modern ones like Gandhi had intermission in the middle. If they brought this out, maybe they would bring back the intermission.
We'll never know. Just another Snyder Cut tragedy. I think setting it up as having to do all the introduction for Justice League in this film did end up making it a bit... Yeah, I'm not sure. Part of me feels like they could have made a better job of it if they just, treated the Justice League's existence as something that had already happened and not made us go for all this team-building stuff. But, I don't know. I guess it's the logical thing to do in the first one. And if they always existed, you have to explain why they weren't in the previous films.
Yeah.
I can appreciate the desire not to just copy Marvel note for note by doing, a bunch of solo films, then a team-up film. But there must surely be another way to do a superhero team film other than being obliged to make 5 films beforehand. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy seem to manage it.
Yeah, no, that's a very valid point. Yeah, and I guess, I don't know if it's to do with the sort of the way they want to tell the story rather than the story they want to tell themselves. Obviously, like Batman versus Superman only had, 3 heroes in it, but still managed to be a very long film. I think there's something to do with this sort of tonally rich style that Snyder's trying to execute that I guess lends itself to length. I mean, it's not just the fact that he likes long slow-mo sequences. There's something to do with the kind of, his pacing is quite slow. There's quite a lot of long scenes in it. So, and I guess it's to do, I guess he wants to build up this kind of dark and moody tone, which is not sort of something you can sort of slap on from the first frame. Like a lot of the Marvel films will begin with a thunderclap, a spaceship or a fighter jet kind of screams in, you see a hero making quips over the radio, you're about 30 seconds into the film and the tone and the feel has been established. This tone is something that needs to sort of be built up over time. And obviously, we've got the fully undiluted version of it in this film. The Superman costume has been changed back to sort of dark grey blue from the more traditional Superman colours that he had in the Whedon cut. So I think there's something to do with this kind of the style and sort of tone of Snyder lends itself to length and this kind of mood, but also once you multiply that with trying to set up sort of 6 or 7 characters, that's kind of compounding the length, and that's how you end up in this sort of position.
I'm never going to watch it again, and I can't say I particularly hope they make those sequels. I know it did leave me with a certain sort of vague, lingering interest in what, these versions of characters have done or might go on to do. It almost made me actually want to go and watch Wonder Woman 1984, which I still haven't got around to. Or, this Flash film that they keep threatening to make. Or I assume since it's made like $1 billion, there's going to be an Aquaman 2 at some point. So, it's not as if this version of the Justice League has died on its arse. It just looks like we're not going to get any more 4-hour Zack Snyder films.
Probably not. When I was in preparation for this review, I went back and listened to our review from 2017 of the Justice League, and one of the things we said is that we liked Jason Momoa. This is our introduction to him as Aquaman, and we were convinced that a Jason Momoa Aquaman film could work. And lo and behold, it did. And, we said that the actor playing the Flash was very good. A Flash film would be something we'd like to see. Stand by that now. I still think he's good. So, yeah, there's probably life yet in the DC Justice League franchise. I don't know, What remains to be seen is whether people are sufficiently inspired by those sort of trailer bits on the end to make a kind of another big team-up film weaving in all those different characters.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go all the way now and deliver my threatened spoilers for the epilogue. So if you care about spoilers for the last 20 minutes of the Snyder Cut, then run away. Yeah, but yeah, the one part that did annoy me and get a bit into ponderous territory. It might just be because the Jared Leto Joker fundamentally annoys me. But yes, the Jared Leto Joker turned up towards the end to have some portentous back and forth with Batman, and it did not do that much for me. In the background of this sort of dystopian hellscape, which they seem to be entering into the continuity of the video game Injustice, where Superman goes evil because Lois Lane died, which isn't really a story that I wanted to see, to be honest. Having spent an entire film finally getting to the point where the superheroes are friends, I kind of feel like I'd have rather seen a bit more excitement for the prospect of them being friends, rather than immediately teasing the prospect of Batman fighting Superman again.
Yeah, that was not good. This film, I've said several times that this film is too long, and although it's difficult to know where it could be easily cut other than the excessive amount of slow-mo, definitely the kind of 2 big epilogues tagged onto the end of the film could quite easily have gone. Yeah, especially one with this sort of vision of the Batman and the Joker. So in the film, having a long discussion about a chronology that we haven't seen yet, which I assume is just, I don't know, are they just trying to cram in as many setups for a Batman and Joker film as well as a future Justice League film and possibly a Martian Manhunter film? I mean, this cut only exists because of a fan-based internet campaign to have it made. I guess you got to lay the groundwork for the next wave of the campaign to get his next film made. If Zack Snyder's going to be the man who does these populist appeal directly to the people to get his film made rather than appeal to studio executives.
I believe there already is a Restore the Snyderverse hashtag you can see, which is, imploring DC to make every remaining film that Zack Snyder feels like he might want to make. So you can care about that if you want. I'm sure they're going to keep making films regardless. I mean, what DC seemed to have established as their thing in the aftermath of the interconnected Snyderverse stuff falling apart is this willingness to make slightly less generically similar looking films than Marvel do. A bit more directorial vision, a bit more uniqueness, and a bit less ubiquity. That's a thing they can do, I mean, some of them have worked, some of them haven't, but at least there's a bit more to them and they don't all look the same. Yeah, I'm more interested in seeing that than I am in seeing a tightly woven Snyder continuity. I mean, even if they let Snyder make another film in the future, cool, but just leave everyone else alone. It's fine. Just let him do his thing if he wants to, and I'll ignore it if I want to.
I mean, I guess he should just make Batman films, because at least the character of Batman does suit the tone that he seems to like with these things. I'm convinced they're going to keep making DC, Justice League character films.
They're already filming a new Batman film, aren't they? The old Robert Pattinson film.
Yeah, I watched the new trailer for that last night. Well, I don't know, it's not like new, it was new-ish. But yeah, that could be good.
Yeah, I saw a new trailer for James Gunn's Suicide Squad movie last night. That was a lot of fun. Looks like they're letting him dick around and enjoy himself. And yeah, if they're willing to bring people on and let them do whatever, I'm fine with that.
I mean, Warner Brothers don't seem to be short on money. They're willing to pour into DC properties. Again, this one with Margot Robbie, Idris Elba, Peter Capaldi, and a huge long list of famous names in that film. So there's certainly appetite for more Warner Brothers DC superhero content. Whether we'll get a Zack Snyder Justice League team up, I mean, inevitably, if they keep making films with Justice League characters in them, they will eventually at some point want to cross them over, I suppose. But I can imagine that they're probably going to let the Justice League itself sit for a bit and try and, get a few films that people like under the belt, because there aren't too many of those.
But yeah, this film certainly exists, despite the fact we've now spent about half an hour on it. This is a bit of a self-reviewing film, to be honest. You probably already know if you want to see this, and yeah, as Mark Commode said in his review, it's now coherent, it's definitely a better, more coherent film than the Whedon cut was. He's achieved the thing he wanted to make, and it's definitely more of an actual complete piece in itself. And, there's something to it as a different vision of superheroes. It's, as I say, I quite enjoyed it, although in a weird sort of campy, knowing lameness way, which I don't know if that's the way he wanted it to be intended. Like, you always get the vague feeling that it's meant to be taken somehow seriously, and I thought it was, kind of enjoyably camp and silly.
I mean, yeah, it's not something I'd recommend, but if you want to see it, it's not devoid of quality. It's not a terrible way to spend 4 hours. There aren't many films that are of that length that are really, really good, but this one is passable but flawed. Finally, this episode, we will be discussing Pacific Rim: The Black, a new Netflix anime following on from the Guillermo del Toro film about giant mechanical Jaegers that require two pilots to function, fighting giant kaiju from another dimension. This show follows teenagers Taylor and Haley as they travel across Australia, which has been abandoned following kaiju attacks, looking for their lost parents. We've seen the entire first series. Nick, did you enjoy this show?
Yeah, I broadly enjoyed it. It's fairly standard in a lot of ways, but unlike, say, Tribes of Europa last week, my second unflattering Tribes of Europa remark in a single episode, it felt like it had some momentum. The characters felt a bit more distinct. I enjoyed the fact that they tried to actually have a separate plot or event in each episode, even though they still had a lot of continuity. It was in many ways a bit of a sense of the chopped up movie in this show, but each episode did still have a plot within it which resolved itself by the end and gave you some kind of confrontation, often but not always, obviously involving a Jaeger punching a kaiju. And yeah, well, it was in many ways fairly generic action dystopia storytelling. They met the monsters, they met the humans who have become monsters to survive, but the teen angst was at least fun enough. They introduced a few more characters as they went along. Yeah, I enjoyed it fine. It's probably quite standard, but I liked it.
Yeah, I enjoyed the show as well. It's a good action adventure, as you said. I like the fact that they recognised quite early on that the Jaegers fighting kaiju plot, although spectacular, isn't sort of an interesting source of conflict. What's a more interesting source of conflict is against the people, as you say, who've become monsters left behind in this kind of deserted wilderness. And some of the characters the teenagers encounter on their way. Probably my favourite part of the show was they encountered a woman called May, who was a sort of battle-hardened sort of outcast amongst this group of, I guess, who were sort of banded together to survive in the Black, this area that's been abandoned to the kaiju. And she's got this thing involving like altered memories and possibly that have been played with during the process of piloting a Jaeger. And I kind of felt that she's got more interesting character and backstory, and I would prefer to show about May and her story rather than these two teenagers who are a little sort of bland heroes. They've got a bit of that bland hero thing going on, but there was at least some interesting conflict between the main characters and some tense scenes. So yeah, it was interesting.
I quite enjoyed Pacific Rim, I think, when I saw it. I think many years ago. I think Pacific Rim predates this podcast. It's quite a while ago now it came out. But I guess because there's always a market for giant robots fighting giant monsters, it seems to occasionally spit out these new franchise entries, even though it was by itself, I thought, quite a small sort of cult film. I think there was a sequel a few years ago, which I didn't watch, and now there's this anime, which, according to the internet, has already been renewed for a second season. So yeah, the Pacific Rim Empire will continue its very slow advancement.
Yeah, it's interesting because the original film was all about the style. It was kind of Guillermo del Toro's kind of visuals and the way he'd brought these Jaegers in kaiju to life. Yeah, the plot obviously was not particularly sophisticated, but there was a real sense of style to it. Yeah, they've kind of carried that over a bit into this, but it's kind of weirdly focusing more on the plot element. But it's still enjoyable.
Well, yeah, I enjoyed Pacific Rim fine, but I always thought it focused a bit weirdly on the sort of contained within a military base side of the world. Sort of came away a bit thinking, okay, what's it actually like to live in this world? I guess, it's a conscious choice to take a very top-level view of this world and not really care what it's like to be a random person. But I do think that left a lot of potential for, future spin-offs to focus more on that. So yeah, this is, in some ways, very much the Pacific Rim media I wanted.
Yeah, digging further into, the world and what it's like to live in it.
Well, yeah, and there was, some fun stuff about people living off kaiju meat or kaiju milk, and there was a bit where one of the heroes has to drive the Jaeger by himself and does some crazy shit, or what the Jaeger does to you if you try and pilot it about 1 million times with people who are unsuitable. You know, it's interesting stuff to dig into outside of this sort of quite efficient military world.
Yeah, it makes the world richer and more developed. You kind of explores more this idea of like what happens when you're linking your brain to someone else's brain directly. What will happen to you over time of doing that? Yeah, there's lots of sort of interesting things going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, again, my mind is unblown, but yeah, I thought it was fun. I thought there was enough there to keep it entertaining on a minute-by-minute level. The human villain, although I think moving on to what becomes of people is the right move in this plot, but I felt like the human villain was maybe a bit generic. He was just, you know, a man with a pointy beard. But I'd be interested to see how they develop. There's, again, in the last episode, there's some nicely placed teases for some slightly more interesting human kaiju Jaeger crossbreed villains and different variations on the characters, which will hopefully take us into more interesting territory in the future. I would watch a second season of this.
Yeah, certainly. There's quite a lot of setup in this first series. I think it's only 7 episodes and they're only about half an hour each, so it's pushing out a lot of plot lines that can be picked up. I mean, there's some interesting mysteries. They meet a sort of a kid wandering around in the black, the wilderness, and there's a sort of like mystery to do with what's going on with this kid. They just call him Boy because he doesn't talk and they don't know his name. And yeah, there's some interesting twists there, and they encounter some other sort of strange creatures that live in the kind of abandoned world of the black, this kind of, you know, large empty space, including cities and things that are just being left completely empty, with the mystery of ultimately it was like their parents went into this black, where have they gone? So it's not a show that's short of mystery or things to get into. And I quite liked it when they kind of brought the sort of core cast of characters together, and they were sort of had this unlikely band of people who'd kind of linked up to survive. There was a sort of real charm to some of the characters that was nice.
Well, yeah, there was some fun bits towards, well, sort of in the sort of the calm between the middle action bit and the end action bit, where the main characters sort of chilled out and relaxed together, which was quite sweet and quite fun and a bit more endearing. I mean, yeah, to once again compare it to Tribes of Europa, you know, although the main characters were quite straightforward and quite archetypal, I felt like they at least had a bit more interest in their relationships than some of the Tribes of Europa character had, and there was a bit more attempt to give them a human moment outside of their constant suffering.
Yeah, because there's also like what underpins is a sort of family relationship, which was quite sad, and these children have lost their parents. They're trying to find them. The bond between brother and sister, you know, is kind of the core of the characterization. I quite like how it would kind of go in different directions, or there were so a few unexpected kind of twists. So I don't know if this is a spoiler for the events of the first episode, so it's not a major spoiler, but you might want to, if you want to watch this unspoiled, then skip ahead. After they introduce the main characters and where they're living, they set up a sort of series of supporting characters, including what appears to be a love interest for both the brother and the sister. And then in the first episode, there's a kaiju attack and they're all killed, apart from the two main characters, the brother and the sister, which I was really surprised by. They kind of quite cleverly said it like, oh, look, there's these characters and they have relationships that we're going to explore, and oh no, they're all dead. And now the characters are going to go somewhere else and meet other characters. I thought, like, oh, that's unexpected.
Yeah, at a level of simplistic judgment, because it's a cartoon, and my guess maybe because I haven't watched that much anime, I was slightly unprepared for the level of, you know, action brutality they were prepared to go to at times. It's not, you know, hardcore 18 rated, not for kids anymore, but it does have its surprisingly dark moments.
And also some kind of sort of quite psychologically dark bits, and you've got the sort of the main character and the way that she's sort of almost been abused by how her mind has been sort of like rewritten and memories like erased and things like that, in order to, you know, it's a sort of a technological form of gaslighting, I suppose, that she's been subjected to. And, you know, obviously this has left an impression on her, and there's no sort of easy fixes. There's no, oh yeah, now you've met up with the good guys, so you're all better. There's this sort of lingering sense of the scars that this kind of conflict has left on you. So I quite like all these kind of slightly more interesting things that are going on in the show, which at its surface is about giant robots fighting giant sort of monsters from another dimension.
Well, yeah, and again, the stuff with her mind being messed with, which is sort of played again as an extension of existing kaiju technology, is another nice use of the world building.
Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot to like about this show. Yeah, it's quite short, really. I could have definitely watched more of it, so I'm glad there's going to be a second series. And now they've got a lot of elements in play, that's probably where interesting stuff will start to happen.
Yeah, you know, if you've got space in your heart for more dystopian media, this is a decent one to watch. Decent recommendation. Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence for this fortnight, so thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this and want to hear still more from us, you can follow us on social media, where we are at MFV Podcast or Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook. And if you want to reward us for what we've done here, then you can go to your podcast provider of choice, I'm told especially Apple Podcasts, but knock yourself out, and leave us a nice review. 5 stars, please. Thank you.
You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and read short written pieces by Nick and myself. If you go on the website right now, you'll also see a series of articles written by Tom Coley, revisiting the albums of his teenage years with a sort of sense of grown-up perspective. So far, he's been looking at Stereophonics, Delirious and REM. So yep, go up there if you want to find some interesting nostalgia reviewing of albums. And if you want to find any more from me, then you can visit my website, which is redtrainblog.com, or follow me on Twitter, where I'm at Alastair J.R. Ball.
I didn't actually know Tom was doing REM next. As a fan, that excites me. I'll look forward to that, and you should too, listeners. And yes, if you want to hear more from me, I am NickMB on Twitter, or nickbryan.com on the web following network. Yes. And next episode on the podcast. After a year off the superhero media, it appears to be coming thick and fast now. As next episode, we will be finally watching Wonder Woman 1984. And if you think that's because the price has just dropped on Amazon, then you would be correct. And we'll also be covering the opening few episodes of the new adaptation of Invincible. This is the animation, which is on Amazon Prime. So yep, see you in 2 weeks for that. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, we have tickled the balls of the Marvel fans. Now to do something unspeakable to DC fans.
Yeah, from the hellish depths of the libcuck paradise of the Marvel Universe, it's time to talk about a superhero film for real men.
I might as well just use that as the intro. I mean.
Yeah, sure, why not? Okay, so...
Right, so let's go for it.
Yeah, if you can manage to introduce it without using the words libcuck, then good luck to you.